Hi, friends. I get to be here this morning with Marche, Vic, and Brian. We wanted to have a conversation about Dr. King today. Today's January 20th, 25th anniversary of commemorating Dr. King's Day of Service. As we know, Dr. King was born on the 15th, but the powers that be give us the day off today. And part of our service in honor of Dr. King today is to have this conversation. I'm Kathy Knight in Chicago, cisgender, lesbian, white, and I would invite Brian to introduce oneself.
Well, I'm Brian Ray, heterosexual, cisgender, straight black male, but still a considerable black feminist because I think that black feminism is the antithesis of the racist patriarchy because it considers race and gender. And that's who I am. Oh, I'm in Chicago. It's a nice cold day. And so I invite Vic.
Oh, thank you. I am Vic Motherwell, also in nice and freezing Chicago, hence my little blanket. I am Jewish, white, queer, and trans, and I like he and they pronouns. I would love to invite Marche.
Marche Sylvester. I am in the Chicago area as well, and I identify as Black, queer, femme, and cisgendered. Yeah, and I'm excited to be on the call with you all, so thank you.
Great. Well, we thought we'd engage a question around how did we first meet Dr. King? And meet, air quotes. So, Marche, what do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I realized that I feel like I am always meeting Dr. King, that there is a different iteration that I understand and see as I engage in the world in different ways. And so, the elementary school meeting was a pretty, very, very standard kind of small understanding. And I think as I'm growing and engaging, I've been thinking so much now about the disruptive nature and the like unsanitized version of King that is far more real than the person I met when I was younger. And so, so I'm thinking a lot about just those iterations. So I'm curious for other folks as you reflect what you hear. Brian or Vic, however.
I have vague memories of news reports when he was in Chicago. I mean, really vague. But so the initial really getting to be conscious of him was on August 5th when the riot started. And then there was he kind of, I don't want to say he swole up in Black history at that point. And it was like in early days, it was Black History Week. It was simply all about him. And because he was like the clearest thing in our memory that we had, him and Malcolm X, who people consider to be different sides of the same coin. But then after that, you start, you get caught up in the sanitized version, and then you find out that there is a version that isn't at all sanitized, and it was quite angry and disruptive, as you said. And so that's kind of how it's now. I see him as a mythical figure who basically was sacrificed in order to change the world. I pretty much see him as Jesus 2 centuries later, because the impact of his death did indeed change the world. Vic?
Thank you. It's so much to think about, and I love getting to hear you all's perspectives. Um, like Marche, my introduction to Dr. King was in elementary school. But I feel like when I got the chance to understand his legacy and his sort of much more the depth of his power was much later. I was working in Philadelphia with Kensington Welfare Rights Union, which basically does the same thing as what's happening right now in Oakland, of like moms who are on public assistance taking over abandoned and foreclosed homes and housing, you know, families experiencing homelessness in them. And it was, they were part of a much larger national movement called the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. And I got involved with them as well, and ended up getting to go on a reenactment of the Poor People's March from Marks, Mississippi to Washington, D.C. And part of what their whole movement was about was basically that, like, each one teach one mentality of like passing on as much of the sort of richness of both civil rights history and also poor people's movements histories and how they interweave. And so getting to kind of understand more about, you know, what happens when this person who is seen as a civil rights leader begins to talk about the ways that race and socioeconomics are woven together, and then how that also changes the threat level of how he and his legacy and the movement at large are seen as a threat to the status quo and to white supremacy and all of the things that are meant to keep it in place. So I feel like that's when my brain began to be expanded around beginning to understand his legacy better.
You are beginning to touch upon what the work means to you. So can we say more about that? What did the work of Dr. King mean to you then and certainly now? I think there's been a significant shift over the years of how the public is viewing Dr. King. What personally, how do you see that maybe shifting in you over time?
I went through a bunch of changes with Dr. King. First off, they renamed my favorite street in Chicago after him. I still got a little mad about that. But when I was real young, I was very angry that the civil rights movement didn't seem to have, that he left such a big vacancy. And it sort of deflated the whole thing after he passed, even after, you know, all the anger had simmered down. And he was so dynamic that there was no filling it up or filling that space in. And even as Jesse Jackson had come to Chicago and started Operation Push, or at that time Operation Breadbasket, it was nothing compared to what we needed. But I learned. Then I read a letter from Birmingham jail, and that kind of changed my mind. It was like it wasn't a lot of people. A lot of people weren't helping him, and it wasn't just that there wasn't a lot of white moderates, as you know, we still condemn white moderates, but there were a lot of black people who were not getting on board either. And it was so sad because, you know, he gave us all of these great instructions. He pointed things out, but we didn't want to take them up. We didn't want to continue in that vein, and so but probably because we didn't have the power and the platform, they were able to give us a sanitized version of a very disruptive person. And so now trying to clear that out and see that he was a pretty angry person, and it wasn't all about that I have a dream or the prophetic power of the mountaintop speech. That was just frightening. but also the fact that poverty and war, these were things that the racist patriarchy just thrived off of, and that the only way to end it was to confront them continuously on those things. We still have a lot of people who don't see the era of war. We just, how can you not? I was listening to all of these reports when Soleimani was killed, and they were saying that he was an evil man. And I was like, he was simply effective at the job he did because his country had been invaded. I mean, the nation had been invaded, and so you do what you can do. You all put him in that position. He didn't want that, and so we still have people banging the gong for war as though nothing were bad about it. We consider the war as a loss of all of the people in all of the soldiers lost, but the hundreds of thousands of people lost in Iraq. We don't even think about them as humans, but he did. He talked about that with Vietnam, and he saw that as it was the same thing, endless mire war that wastes a lot of money. And it's like how we still have not gotten our priorities right as a nation. So I'm good about it.
Something that I'm resonating with that you said, I think I have actually been sitting with the letter from the Birmingham jail as well. And I think it's that piece. And maybe it's just like, if I'm honest, I'm like, I think I'm probably angry. And it's the one that resonates the most with the calling out and the sense that I think as someone who, for many years did a lot of kind of work cross-culturally, work that was kind of trying to do different pieces, and just really realizing that thinking about queer folks, thinking about Black folks, thinking about Black trans women in particular, and just recognizing that there is a way that it means a lot about being called to do work, to see the work that isn't directly your identity of focus as work that has to be done and work that has to be called to, and having the right to be angry when that doesn't happen, both in myself and in other people, right? And so I think that has been where I've been sitting with King the most. I think I have just needed to reclaim the version that wasn't so nice and dreamy, if you will, and sanitized and simple. And I think I'm also challenged the piece that you said around like even calling out Black folks to be a part of that as well, and to say that there were a lot of people who were just, who knows, complacent, tired. I'm trying to think of like myself as what it means to be a movement person, and to sometimes just be tired and complacent because maybe it's easier, I'm not really sure, or just tiredness takes over, but just really resonating with that sense as well. Yeah.
I think that so much of this is about intersectionality and about the ways that the versions that we're taught are not just sanitized, but are purposely streamlined into some idea of a single issue platform, which isn't the reality at all. But it, takes away from how much deeper the movements that are tied to his legacy are. And it's making me think about learning about the trial that was in 1999 that, literally showed beyond a shadow of a doubt the chain of command and the acts of nation and state that went into his assassination, and how I literally never saw that televised. I literally never saw that on the news. I did not hear that anyone's young people were learning that in school. I still haven't heard that, and it's 20 years later. We're still talking about a single fanatical racist instead of a massive racist nation. And that's, and that those are not the same thing, and those are intricately related. And so kind of learning the ways that also is tied in with kind of the concepts we're taught around leadership and around movement building, and that, you know, if the media can portray movements as being led by a single person, well, all you have to do is pick off that person and the movement is, you know, made either less effective or dismantled by the loss or by the like both symbolic and real loss, both on an organizational level, but also on a national and international level. And so that, I think that has made me think a ton particularly in the last 20 years, and after learning about that, about what movement building's about, and also the fact that there was no single leader in the civil rights movement, just like there is no single leader in any other movement. And he was not that single leader. And I have to believe that he also did not believe himself to be that single leader, that he understood that he was part of a vast network of people who, both the in front of the scenes and the behind the scenes people, all of them important. And so for me, that's informed, I think, a lot of my own journey along the way, is learning about what does it mean to be, to have and to respect all different kinds of leadership, and that it's not just the person who's the poster child that's doing the work, and it's not just the person who, you know, signs the checks who is that. It's none of that. It's actually much, much vaster than that. So that's kind of where my head has gone from the things that you all have shared.
You know, we are, Brian and I are of a different age than Vic and Marche. And so the legacy maybe has a broader view. I don't know. I don't want to assume that. But that to see the legacy so whitewashed, so that good white moderates can celebrate MLK Day is something that I hear all of us sort of trying to get back to the truth. Because if we don't notice the truth, then whatever comes next is false. And so, you know, Women's March in DC this month, Women's Marches all over the country this month. Today, in this very day, armed, named white supremacists are marching in Virginia. And so the white supremacist, racist patriarchy is live and well. And I'm wondering if that is, in fact, a reaction to this growing awareness among white moderates and others that the legacy is our future, that unless we claim it, we're going to lose it. Does that make sense?
You know, I'm a believer that one of the things I disagree with King on is the inevitability of justice, the moral arc of the universe, and all that fun stuff. It's a wonderful sentiment, but the truth is destiny is always a matter of determination. And what happens is that we're getting a chance. In the 1619 series, Hannah Nicole Smith said that Black people are the perfecters of American democracy. That until we all, then we ain't, which is my saying. Either when it comes to justice, we all or we ain't. And so until we and the Native Americans, which he did a really good speeches about Native Americans too, have the same quality of life, or the same rights and responsibilities that we imbue white men with, then this is not the America that you all keep telling us that it is, or that you all tell yourselves that it is. Now, I think we're getting to a place where we're starting to peel back a lot of things, and the people I see doing it are not just Black women or queer women or queer Black women, who I think are some of the strongest feminists there are, but also straight white women, straight cishet white women are now peeling back and looking at that, saying, "Is this really true?" I mean, because it was, and white men are not going to listen to anybody. and I say this, but not as a derogatory thing. White men's ain't gonna listen to nobody, because white men's aren't all white and they're not all men. They are people who uphold the racist patriarchy in every way they can. And so they are not going to listen to anybody who is not a white man. We don't yet have enough white men involved in the movement to make an impact, but we are gaining more white women who will eventually mean that more white men will be in, because we've got to see America as a diverse place. And that's what he really wanted, everybody to have the same chance and protections under the law. We are nowhere near that. It's 50 freaking years later, and we are nowhere closer to that than we were on that day. Well, I can't say we're nowhere near, we're not closer. We are a little bit closer, but it's such a little bit. It's such a little bit. We're still seeing the police treat Black citizens very differently than white citizens. And white citizens don't seem to have a problem with that. Well, not enough white citizens, should I say that. It doesn't seem, they're like, all lives matter, you know, that's not what we're talking about. But the thing is, we are still struggling toward that goal. And one of the things that I have learned about America is that we have to keep struggling. It is, as said in the preamble, in order to form a more perfect union. And this is part of that struggle. And he was I think probably the biggest metaphor for that struggle of a more perfect union was his life. And he did it, and he didn't even get to be 40 years old. He didn't even get to be 40. And that sounds so crazy, but the things he did, it's no way that you cannot say that was prophetic, because he shook the foundations of this nation. And we need to keep shaking them until we take Myth America and center it on the people of America instead of just the racist patriarchy. And he struggled to do that the whole time. And he talked about poverty, which was a big thing, because that's what the racist patriarchy is all about. It's not about race. It's not about misogyny. It uses race and misogyny in order to maintain power over resources and to keep the direction or the priorities of our nation in their best interests and not the interests of the nation itself. And so as we understand that, and that's what he told us over and over. It's not about race. It's about money. We're going to spend all this money on war, and we can't afford to keep people in health. We can't afford to feed and home. Come on now. It's just a matter of priorities. And people keep telling us that we can't do it. It costs too much. But it's just a matter of changing our priorities from war to peace, and from patriarchy to people. And I'm going to sit down some more.
I think there's also just something too of that is like, there is a way that sense of scarcity of resources keeps folks who are all fighting for the scraps to continue to fight one another. And as if there isn't a level of abundance out there, it's just all localized in one place. And so, yeah, what it means for people to see their cause as like necessarily linked to other folks who don't look or have the similar experiences, because there is a similarity that is there. Yeah, so that's what it reminded me of, and what made me think of what you were saying, Brian.
Y'all are making me think so much. Thank you. Yeah, Marche, specifically what you were just saying about fighting for scraps. And I think we see that in every marginalized community. And we see it play out and like rear its ugly head in a whole bunch of different ways. And it was making me think about, within trans communities, there are so many times that we see, people fighting truly for like the most minuscule of resources. And people are so used to doing without and being so utterly resourceful as to make, literally something out of nothing. And so, there's tremendous power and beauty in that. And also, God, what could our people do if we actually had resources? And it's such a powerful and also almost impossible to conceive of thought, and it's, in terms of that, like specifically, Brian, what you were saying about it, it's all about money. I remember learning about, the ways that, the Black Panther movement was taught, at least to where I'm from, was taught as like, oh, this hyper radical, violent, gun-toting, scary, all this stuff, movement, as opposed to a radical resource sharing, providing for people movement that was about the deepest possible sociopolitical analysis. And that like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X always being sort of posed as not just the opposite sides of a coin, but like, oh, Martin Luther King did it the right way. Nonviolence is the right way. And because that's less scary to white people in the now, that thought is more palatable. Right. And being taught that they were like diametrically opposed. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, couldn't have been more different and never saw eye to eye and all these things, when in fact, towards the end of both of their lives, that's what they came together on, was actually, this is about economies. This is about poverty and the control of resources and the manipulation and control of people through division in order to constantly reify the same power structures that are about the control of resources, going back to long pre-enslavement of human beings, all of these things. That is the story of this country. And that, it's the story of other countries too. It's certainly not unique to us. But in this country, that is the name of the game. And we see it play out, and we feel it in our bodies every day.
It's weird, and we know this in our hearts. I believe that even poor white people know this, that the racist patriarchy just lives off of the divisiveness that they create, and they don't want to share resources. They don't want to use resources for the good of the nation because they can use them for themselves. And then they trick us into thinking things like patriotism, which to me, Martin Luther King, civil rights was the ultimate patriotism because that's for everybody. They trick us into thinking it's a defense contract so that they can get money from defense contracts, and it's like, no, it's not. The people who are really fighting for your freedom, you never hear anybody say that Martin Luther King fought for freedom. I mean, defended freedom for all, or that the dude from the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson, that this is for all Americans. They just want to see it as for Black people, and that's not how it is at all. And the press and the media just keeps selling it as a separate issue thing. Civil rights were for everybody. They are for everybody. And how is it that people keep thinking that it's just something for Black people? I don't know.
Then that lets us white folks off the hook.
Yeah.
We don't have to own anything to affect change.
Yep. And if I'm not doing it, I don't have to do anything to make it change. I don't have to recognize it. I can live in my fog of racism, of systemic racism, and my fog of systemic misogyny and homophobia and I don't even have to see all those things or acknowledge they exist. And as long as I don't do that, I don't have to do anything about ensuring that those people enjoy civil rights.
Or to be grateful for that. I mean, truly, to have someone fight for you who's literally fighting for civil rights for every human being, and also for basically like the redemption of this country's soul. The best parts of this country since its inception as a country are things that have to do with exactly this. These are some of the only parts of this country's history that are not hideous, and yes, there are parts of it that are incredibly rocked in pain, but these are also like, when we talk about what is like beautiful or great about the American story, I think a lot of times this is also what white people like to celebrate, right? Because it's some sort of I'm not quite sure the right ways to say it, but like it's some way of saying, well, this is what America is really about. When in fact, no, this is the opposite of what America is really about. This is just some of the only truly great parts of what has happened in America so far. And there are actually many, but most of them are not stories that we get to hear. So like, Kathy and Marche, we were talking before about, the Stonewall riots. Well, most people have never heard of the Compton cafeteria riots. Equally important, but we celebrate Stonewall every single year. And there are actually so many different moments like that. And those are, in my mind, those are our moments of redemption in this country, where we actually get to see what this country is about in the realist way and in the beautiful way, instead of all these ways that shame our humanity.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we could go on for days, and I wish we could. Why don't we have a last thought from each of us, maybe about where you see the legacy of Dr. King maybe impacting you today, or impact. You have talked a little bit about how you see it living out today. So whatever you would care to say as you are closing your thoughts.
Well, one of the things that I'm really grateful for in the existence of Martin Luther King is that he challenged the racist patriarchy in a way that it hadn't really been out loud before. And he drew a lot of people into it. And the joy of that is that we get to rewrite the myth America to be more inclusive. And that to me is the ultimate win, is to see America. And our history is bad, that's true. We've done horrid things to many, many, many people. But it's where we come together that we affect the best change and do the most good in the world. I think of, and I always go back to this, that the first democracy in America was in the Iroquois nations. It wasn't America. And a lot of people don't know that. And they did it right, because their Senate was all women. The Senate was all women, and you just couldn't do better than that. And they were the only ones who could depose the chief, who could get rid of the chief was the Senate, just much like ours, except for ours are old white men, which was the exact opposite. And you see how long it's taken us to get anything done. But we need to rewrite the myth so that it is more inclusive. And Dr. King gives us an area to pivot where we can do that. And I'm going to be forever grateful for that.
I feel just a clear charge to be able to see folks who are not in my view all the time, and to be called out of complacency. I think that is what I'm sitting with this year. And I want to be able to let that legacy and the challenge change. and to be kind of forever growing. But I think that sense of choosing to see and then to act continually is what I'm taking at this juncture.
I think what I've been meditating on is the ways that I think I have a long ways of learning to do about this, probably a lifetime of learning still, but that, you know, our actions in social justice are not just the large movements that we build. They are how we feed each other and how we treat each other and how hard we love, and how you speak to the people in your neighborhood and as you move through the world, and that all of those are parts of the action, and are as like quintessentially important as the big shebang that makes the history books. And so that's sort of where my heart's landing with it for today.
One of the heroes of the Church Within a Church movement is Reverend Gil Caldwell, and his words come to me in this moment when he talks about change. He says, people want change without changing. And so part of what's on my heart in this day is to continue to be open to where I need to change, to have the eyes to see and the heart to feel, so that Dr. King's words can find an embodiment within me to change me. And then disrupting the people that I come in contact with, because I'm seeing things a little differently. And so I thank you all for your time and conversation today, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Cool. All right, you all have fun.